What's up, folks? I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews, and once again, we are here on My Sketchy Goodness, joined by Keith Grachow, and this time, Amy Grachow as well. Keith, Amy,
Hello.
welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess we'll get started on this episode. We're going to do something a little different, a little fun, and Keith is generally not gonna ask, or rather not gonna answer a whole bunch of questions, but just draw. So, Keith, just to start off, do you know what you're gonna draw?
Not really. I was thinking I would go with something similar to that monster I did couple, or our last one. So maybe, there we go. Something like
boy.
that. There.
Right on.
But I'm going to let my mom do the talking because she, I think people would be more interested in hearing from her than from me at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So, for our viewers, we have a guest, of course. Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
My pleasure.
I will say really quickly, we've got Blueback saying, "Grandma, hello, it's Zachary." Roar.
There you go.
That is my grandson, and we will be seeing him shortly. Him and his mom.
Wonderful. So yes, Amy, again, welcome to the show. Just like I start my regular interviews, when it comes to yourself, my first question will be simply, for the folks out there who maybe never heard your name, never seen your face, who are you? Who is Amy?
Well, I'm Keith's mom, and Erin is his sister, so I'm Erin's mom, and Zachary is my grandson. And so I'm very much defined by how I'm related to other people, but I do have my own life and things that interest me. I love traveling. One of the reasons that I got into writing stories with Keith was that I've been writing poetry, short stories, little plays my whole life, even when I was very young, just like Keith started when he was very young, to draw and to play with clay figures and that kind of thing. So, like I said, all my life I've been writing. It's one of my pleasures. And
Right on.
I was retiring about 12, 13 years ago. And Keith was very worried that I would have nothing to do with myself. I retired. And he came to me and he said, "Mom, what if we wrote a children's book together?"
Well, it wasn't exact. It was more like, why don't we do something creative together?
Oh, okay.
Because she had, as she mentioned, she writes poetry, and so I thought her poems were always very visually oriented. There was always a lot in it that I can imagine, and so I was thinking maybe we would do like a poetry book where I would have illustrations in the poem with the poems, but I'm not sure that interested you so much. I think you wanted something a little bit more visual. So that's where we veered to decide to do children's books. All right.
Well,
So-
Cool.
at the time, we were just starting with one.
Yes, that's true.
We did not
It's
know
true.
we were going to go further than one. And my stipulation was I did not want this process to get in the way of our relationship, which up to that point was pretty good.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I said, as long as it doesn't get in our way, because we had no idea what it would entail,
Mhm.
what limitations either one of us would have, what boundaries we did or didn't want to cross with you. I mean, it was totally new to both of us, although Keith was very involved with other people and had done a lot of projects and, comic books and graphic novels and other
Yeah.
things.
There's a reason why they say don't work with your family,
Yeah.
right? Like, we had a little bit of that trepidation going, is this going to be a situation where one of us didn't take direction well, or somebody
Stepped on
was,
each other's
yeah,
toes.
like was there going to be an ego involved that made it really difficult? And I mean, early on, I think we realized that we both had each other's best interests at heart. So, when it came to how the story was going to be told, she was wanting me to be able to get the best visuals I can get from the story. And then from my perspective, I always wanted her to be able to just feel free, enjoy the process of this. I didn't want my personality of my experience to kind of take over. I wanted a lot of it to be what she wanted to do in regards to story and stuff like that. So it was kind of that. Yeah, we both, I think, early on were wanting the best for each other, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't think our egos got in the way.
No.
It really was very collaborative and very enjoyable, creative on both our
Yeah.
parts. I think it enriched our relationship,
Yeah.
if anything, over the years. So it was great. I just decided, I think it was my idea. I don't even, it's hard to even remember because it was so many years
Yeah.
ago. Who thought of what? Because Keith on his own is an excellent writer. And so, a lot of the ideas we had, the characters we made up, I wrote. It was all in rhyme, so I wrote the poetry. But very often Keith would come in. Well, maybe this would sound better if you said it this way, or maybe we shouldn't even say anything and just let the illustrations tell the story. So, that was a learning experience, especially for me, because I had never done
Yeah.
anything with illustrations before. So I decided that to be as creative as possible, I wanted it to take place on a planet named Up in the Sky. Because then Keith could just let his imagination go wild in terms of illustration, and I could kind of go wild in terms of, drawing the characters. And so and making up names, and it was just so much fun. Really, it was. And then once Keith started drawing the illustrations, it was like, how did he know that's what I thought that character should look like?
Cool.
It was
Is it really?
amazing.
Did you think some of those characters
Yes,
were already living in your head? And then
I was amazed at how well he conceived of, what they looked like. I think there were a couple of things that, I might have said, well, I think, this should be not quite as severe looking or whatever it was, but for the most part, it was really a wonderful experience. And it went so well that we decided to do a second and a third. That was how our trilogy of children's stories developed.
That's really interesting. Like, whenever, two people decide to work together on a creative process, just inherently, because, you're two separate people, you're going to have different ideas, you'll butt heads, and I find more often than not, when it comes to people who've been at it for a long time, if they've never really had to share in the creative process, I'll say, they're like, well, this is the way it should be. And they don't want to change it. And so I've heard of a lot of people in teams butting heads. Often you hear about, musicians and bands breaking up over stuff like that. Or even artists just not being able to quite get a book completed because, well, the writer thinks this or that. So it's interesting that not only with the collective experience you guys both have individually, but also because of your relationship, because the mother son dynamic that goes on, that you could work through it, and like Keith was mentioning earlier, sort of play off each other and get something personal out of it, but also be able to make the books you guys are making. Now,
And
really, oh,
yeah,
really quick, Amy, I just
yeah.
want to quickly mention, um, Blueback, I believe Zachary, is waving hello, says, I love you guys. Luna says hi too.
I'm sure Luna's going to come into a book at some point. Luna is Liz, the bulldog puppy.
Oh, wonderful.
And she's very cute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's
I mean,
very affectionate, and she would make a great character in a book, I'm sure.
Yep.
one of these days. So, I forget whom it was. I believe, Amy, you mentioned so far you and Keith have created 3 books together, correct?
Well, 3 of the series on a planet named Up in the Sky, and then based on the 3rd story, I was inspired to write a chapter book called Caddy Beyond. And Keith
Oh,
did the cover and the spot illustrations, the back cover. So he was, involved, not quite as much as with the 3 children's books. So I did that, and then I wrote another book which I'm still working on, which Keith really has not had much to do with. And then we're working on our Summer on the Swing,
Graphic novel prose book.
which
interesting. I
we
like it. Now,
sold.
oh, can you repeat that one?
All right. Can you not hear me?
The audio got a little garbled.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're working on a prose book, a graphic novel prose book. Yeah. So.
Right on. So now, Amy, you mentioned earlier, so you've been like Keith, so he comes by it honestly. You've been creative sort of all your life. What I guess it's a generic question, but I think it's important. What sort of got you into it, and what do you like about it?
I was thinking about that. Actually, um, my father, who has a prominent role in our new graphic novel, he was a World War II veteran. He served in World
Ah,
War II, and my parents were married at the time, and my brother was born about 6 months after he went overseas, so he didn't see my brother till my brother was about a year old. But my father wrote poetry. He would send letters to my mother, these beautiful poems. Some of them were kind of goofy, but um, so I think I get it from him, the poetry stuff. I mean, I was writing poetry from the time I could write. I
hmm
just enjoyed it. It was an outlet. I mean, I was a big reader, and I just enjoyed writing stories and poetry, and I did well in school in English, so it kind of encouraged me to keep on going. And it's a wonderful outlet. It's like journaling for a lot of people, I think. And so poetry. A lot of my poems reflected different aspects of my life.
hmm I mean,
So that.
yeah, you got to write what you know, and
Hmm.
obviously, like, it seems, I guess, stereotypical to say, but you know, often we use art as a form of expression, self-expression, to process things, work through whatever we're thinking about. Um, and I mean, yeah, if poetry was what got you going, what made you feel good, that's
Hmm.
fantastic. When did you start considering doing, I guess, creative work, like seriously? The air quotes, because I mean, to me, if you're creating, it's in some way serious, but
Um,
You did win. We were
yeah,
just talking about it the other day when you won that
yeah.
contest.
I mean, my husband and I had a publication when we lived on the Jersey Shore, and so I would write poems and short stories that we'd put in a publication. So, in a way, it was,
oh, cool.
I wasn't making any money from it, but it was a way for me to for other people to enjoy it. And I always entered contests and things like that. And that's what Keith is referring to. When I was working in, I think it was like a temp where you went from place to place, and so I
Yeah.
had a lot of downtime, in some of these jobs. And there's a magazine called Red Book magazine. I think it's still around. And they had a contest for why families should take vacations together. So I said, oh, you know what? Why not? It's a talent I have. I might as well. And it was like a 300 or 500 word essay. It was very short. So I wrote it while I was at work, and I submitted it, forgot all about it, and then I got a letter in the mail that I won the contest.
Oh my god.
And so I had a choice of either going to Disney World or for a week in the Bahamas. So I chose a week in the Bahamas.
Good
And
move.
since it
Good
was
move.
about families taking vacations together, it was for all four of us. And so when
Ooh.
Keith was about 12, I guess.
Yeah, we
Keith was
figured
about
12.
12, and Aaron was about 9. And we went to Club Med in Eleuthera, Bahamas. And Keith learned how to scuba dive, and there was a circus school there. And the funny thing
Cool.
was, the title was Why Families Should Take Vacations Together. I never saw him. So even though it was a vacation we took together, basically he went, his way. Erin was a little younger, so she kind of hung out with us. But I never, he had a great time. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was published in the magazine, and, that felt good. And so I've always been interested in publishing, but it's very difficult to get anything published.
Yeah.
And so I've been involved in a lot of organizations and writers groups, and that kind of thing my whole life. So I've
Hmm.
worked with other people. I've encouraged people to write on their own. Um, so I've always been involved in it in one way or another. So
Andrew, I really like that. Like it's I'm assuming, as you mentioned, Amy, your father wrote poetry as well. Is there sort of a family history of it?
that's the extent that I know of. Well, I mean there are artists in our family, um, more so like graphic artists. I have a cousin who illustrated Jewish books. I had an aunt who was a fashion illustrator for the New York Times.
I don't think I knew that.
Yes, I told you about Lenore.
Oh, okay.
Remember?
Well, no, obviously I didn't.
I thought I had, yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, you probably did tell me. I just don't remember.
Aunt Lenore is my father's sister, and she, I mean, and,
Oh, maybe I
that
do
was
know.
a
Yeah.
long time. It was back in the, in like the 1950s, maybe. Really long time.
Huh.
So there've been a lot of artists in our family. Um, Not a lot of writers, except for my father that I know of.
Do we have any of his poems or any of his
Yes,
letters? Yeah.
I do. I think I've
Wouldn't
shown
mind.
some to you.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. I have all the letters that my father. I mean, some of them are very poignant because in one of them, he he had been injured, and he was in a hospital in Pennsylvania, and he wrote a letter to my mother saying, I can't wait, for you to visit me. Please bring Mark. That was my brother who was the baby, because he hadn't
Yeah.
seen him. Said, please, I just, I'm so excited to finally meet him. And it was very poignant to read that. I mean, I even
Hmm.
have um, the telegram that was sent to my mother saying that my father was injured.
Wow.
So, yeah, we have a lot of that. And in the book that Keith and I are working on, my Summer on the Swing, not Summer on the Swing,
Somewhere on the swing.
Summer on the Swing. Um, what am I going to say?
Oh,
There's stories about my father in the war, and
Oh.
um,
well, it's not him per se, but it's
yes,
yeah,
based on
based off of.
it's semi autobiographical. But one of the stories that he came back with was that because he was Jewish, and a lot of the other young soldiers who were maybe 19, 20, and they came from little towns, across the South and the Midwest where they had never met a Jewish person or probably a black person or anyone other than them, people like themselves. And so they would meet my father, and seriously, they would say to him, "But where are your horns and tail?"
Oh my god.
That's, I mean, that was serious.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's the kind of stories that he brought back with him. So it was, he didn't talk, like a lot of World War II veterans, he did not talk very much about it because I think it was very devastating to
Oh.
lose friends. And, you know, I mean, and he was one of the people that landed like the second or third day of D-Day, you know, in France, in a place
Yeah.
called St. Lo. And he was a private, and he saw his lieutenant die, and then his sergeant was killed. And my father was made a sergeant because there was nobody else
Yeah, I was sort of next in
who
line.
was the next in line, and then he was injured. So, you know, we're just very lucky that he came back. But he was injured in his hip, but I don't know what they did. They put a pin through his knee, but it caused one of his legs to be shorter than the other. So his whole life, I knew him, you know,
Yeah.
with one leg was like, and he wore a built-up shoe.
It's
You
like
know,
it was like a Frankenstein monster boot. That's what I remember. It was just like one was a regular
Yeah.
size, and then the other was this like big to give so it would
right?
it was a
So
lift
right, so
essentially.
that his
Yeah.
legs were somewhat even. But he never complained, and uh, he was always a very good dancer. And even wearing that clunky shoe, he was still very light on his feet. He was a very amazing
Good for
person.
him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
I
Keith
mean,
remembers him.
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
yeah, like to go through the unimaginable, quite literally, and come out from the way you two were talking about him fairly well. Obviously, a little physical injury aside, but he's inspired you enough to want to create books
Hmm.
and sort of share those stories. That's
Right.
amazing.
Yeah,
I,
to carry on his legacy, or to carry on, you know, the family legacy in a, as I said, it's not autobiographical. We're using liberties to tell these stories so that the
hmm,
story itself, you know, it's a more rich story, but it's not dictated necessarily by those original stories, but it's using those original stories as inspiration and, you know, and I guess character studies, things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would hope he would be proud of it if he could read it today.
Yeah.
well, speaking of reading it, so Keith, to me personally, has mentioned a few times before, just while we were talking at maybe a con we had met at or something about the book. He's mentioned it on the show a few times. Um, sort of, I wanted to sort of dig into it. So the book itself is called Summer on the Swing, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And
It,
oh,
It's
go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Ask your question.
I was gonna say, what state of creation is it in? How and or when can people get it? Sort of all the things, Amy. Let me know what's going on with it, because we've kind of heard about what it's about.
hmm
I have a few more specific questions to ask, but for now, yeah, what state is it in, and when maybe can people get it?
you
Well,
could answer
the
that.
when is a
Open
big unknown.
question.
Right now, it's in a pitch stage, so it's going to be pitched to an agent to see if the agent wants to shop it around. So the pitch stage, to get to the pitch stage, you need to have the as I mentioned, it's a graphic novel prose book. So it has sequential pages in it. It has spot illustrations, but there's also a lot of prose. And the prose
Hmm.
part of it, the story part of it, took a while. Once that was finished, once that was pretty much, we decided, okay, this is about as far as we're going to get with the story. Then I started working on some of the sequential pages, which the agent wanted to see like the first, I don't know, two stories and it's
Okay,
a
yeah.
unique format that we're doing it in. And so once that was done, then I started laying the whole thing out, and it was one of the things I was kind of hinting at when last time talking about InDesign and trying to figure out how to create a workflow for something that's not exactly a graphic novel, not exactly a prose book, and putting it together in a way that the person who's going to read it will get a full picture of what the story is without
Yeah.
having it completely finished. But that's a lot. There's a lot to it. It's probably going to be at least 150 pages when all is said and done. So
Interesting.
yeah, so it'll be a full-on like good sized graphic novel, and we'll hopefully get the agents pique the agent's interest. And if that happens, then who knows? I mean, it could, depending on publishers, could take a short amount of time or it could take years, right? So we just have to be patient once it gets into the hands of an agent.
Fair, very fair. You mentioned, like you said, Keith. So some of it is full on sequential arts, like comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is prose with illustration, and then I didn't quite catch it. You mentioned another term. Um, you mentioned, Keith, from the InDesign perspective and from the creation perspective, it's a little odd, a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, what I was wondering though, for you, when you're with your experience in poetry, and the other prose that you've done, this is kind of, from a writer's perspective, also a hybrid project. It's not exactly a poem. It's not exactly just here's a book. It's kind of a lot. Um, what was it like for you to approach making it and assembling it?
Oh, I'm not sure I remember. We've lived with it for so long. I don't even remember. How did we decide what it was going to be about? Was it your
You
idea? I don't
yeah,
remember.
you approached me with you wanting to do a graphic novel that was socially relevant to today's environment, and I think I was the one who came up with doing something about your childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing something that would resonate today, dealing with anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry and all that kind of stuff, right?
Hmm.
And that's where talking about your childhood and dealing with the loss of your mother at a young age, and then we finally decided, I think, somewhere around like making it where you went to this bungalow colony in the summer when you were, a young person. That would be a really great setting for it. And then we kind of had to figure out, like, as we said, it's not exactly, we weren't going to do something autobiographical per se, but we wanted to be inspired by my
Yeah.
mom's youth and some of the stories that I'd been told about our family. And from there, we just organically talked about like stories from our family. And I was my thing was like, first of all, it was really cool to hear a lot of the stories from my mom. Uh, just I know she's told me some of these things when I was younger. Probably wasn't that interested and didn't listen very well. But as I've gotten
Yeah.
older, I'm much more interested in where we came from, because I recognize that a lot of the people that told these stories aren't around anymore, and the stories need to
Hmm.
continue to be told, right? And it's important. So um, my mom, I was like, okay, anything you can remember, write it down. If we can use it, we'll the more the better, right? And so she just
Yeah.
started writing down all these great stories that she had remembered as a growing up, and especially anything revolving around the bungalow colony. And there was just some really what I really love about it is that there's some just really great um, like character details of things that happened to her and her family that I don't, it wouldn't get it from a generic story about, let's say, a bungalow colony. So that was the kind of stuff that we threw in there. But then obviously it's not a story about her, my mom and her family per se. It's a story about this young girl who is growing up in this area in the
Hmm.
bungalow colony in upstate New York, and trying to navigate some of the things, the loss of a mother, and just being very lonely and within her head because of the type of person she is. And so it lent for a lot of imaginative devices that could be used to get into this person's head and see the world that she created.
The fantasy part was more from you, because you saw the how it could be illustrated in a really fun, creative way. The biographical or autobiographical stuff was the stories that I wrote. And then Keith, like I said, he's an excellent writer on his own. At some point, I don't even know who wrote what. I mean, we just bounced ideas back and forth. I think I wrote, the initial story, but then, Keith came back and said, we really need to make this a little more meaty, this character a little more part of the story. So, we kind of, so it's really from the imagination, and maybe some of the characters are like a conglomeration of different characters that I knew growing up, and a lot of it is probably stuff that I may not even remembered correctly, just my impression of things that had happened and relatives, because it was very interesting, the bungalow colony. I don't know, you probably have seen Dirty Dancing.
I've definitely seen Dirty Dancing, yeah.
Well, that's where it took place, in the Borscht Belt, so to speak. And
okay.
But Dirty Dancing took place at a Grossinger's, or one of the larger places. The one that I grew up in was a small little bungalow colony, and they called them bungalow colonies. And for many years, Jewish people were not allowed to have property in, the Catskill Mountains of New York State, and there would be signs saying no dogs and no Jews allowed. And that was
lovely.
Yes, that was, but then because it was, in those days, people did not fly everywhere. You only drove, so you had to spend your summers someplace that was not that far from New York City, if that's where you lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so the wives would go up during the week, and the husbands would come up on the weekend, and it was like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours from New York City. And so these bungalow colonies sprung up. People did not fly down to Florida. They didn't go to Europe, unless they were very rich. So this was how people spent their summers, and it was a cauldron of all kinds of interesting things going on. And really it was through the view, for me, it was through my viewpoint of a young girl. And I'm sure I didn't see things the way they really happened, but this is my impression. And the one that we spent every summer in was owned by relatives of mine. So almost everybody that was there were cousins of mine. And so it was very interesting. People did not always get along. And then there were other people who lived there. It was a very interesting mix of people. And so every summer I would spend in this particular bungalow colony. And it was, there's a lot of stuff going on. Probably a lot that I didn't even know about underneath the surface.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I did not recount some of the things that I remember that were a little too racy, but some of it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Good.
I don't know, we could have thrown some of that racy stuff in there. I didn't know about that.
There were husbands and wives who didn't belong together, who were together.
who were bungalowing together.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll have to be in the second book.
Yeah, right.
Right.
I don't want to get sued. So.
Well, again, I just want to stress, this is not based off of, it's if anything we're creating, it's original characters and things like that. we're just using inspiration from, you know, her life growing up there. You know, so some of the stories are you know, like have flavors of the history of our family, but they're for sure unique characters and things like
And
that.
Keith was good at the beginning because he said, well, make a map of what it looked like, describe it. And so you know, even though we didn't maybe use the description, it was a way for him to be able to see it in his own head and, you know, put it down as an illustration. So I really had to dig deep into my memory of remembering, you know, I lived in the little house and I lived in the big house, and there was a red bungalow, and there was a horseshoe field, and there were blueberry bushes, and there was a lake with salamanders. I mean, there was a lot of
Ooh, lake with salamanders.
yeah,
I don't think I knew that.
the little orange.
Well, now I may have to throw those in there.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's cool.
Yes,
yeah,
we catch the salamanders, and
that's pretty cool.
there was just a lot of stories that, you know, that I've probably forgotten over the years that I remembered trying to, you know, to recount the things that did or didn't happen there. But it was it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the details naturally can sort of get a little fuzzy, especially as time goes on, and I find if you think back on something too many times, we do have the unfortunate ability to change things a little bit. But one thing I was really curious about is, as you've both mentioned, it's semi-autobiographical, you know, inspired by true stories, but very much so fictional. So I've read a lot of graphic novels that are just straight biographical. They're just someone explaining what their experience was at the time. But what I wanted to ask was, when it comes to this, because you're taking real stories that you lived through, you've heard about, you were told about, and then you're taking them into the realm of fiction, right? So it's not, like I said, it's based on. What was that like, to go through and sort of, I don't want this to sound negative, but like to disengage from it? Maybe it's not the right word, but like to take yourself out of the thing to be able to keep it.
I understand what you're asking. So we needed a vehicle to be able to use the story in a creative way, to remove ourselves from the more autobiographical elements of it. So we used, so it's essentially using a swing to tell the story. This swing that the little, or the teen girl, Leslie, her father and grandfather built years ago. We're using that as a vehicle to tell the story. I don't want to get too deep into it. I'd rather, you know, I don't want to give away too much, but yeah, that was, and I think that was something I'd come up with when I was like, I was like, how can we do this in a way where we can tell the story, to have a way to get to some of these really interesting stories that are outside of this young person's life. And so that's what we once I came up with that idea, then we were able to, it actually told us how the story was going to look. It told us how we were going to, like how the story was going to eventually like narrate, like the voice of it, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, for me, because I am a visual person, I really started to see what this could be. You know, once I started getting some of these stories that my mom had written and getting an idea of like what it looked like there. And then of course I'm doing research on my own, reading up about the different times that we're going to be talking about in the story. So I started to get a really good visual idea of what the story was going to be, how the graphic novel was going to actually look, physically look. My biggest issue was trying to figure out how to like blend the prose with the sequential pages. That's the thing that I was like really concerned about, in regards to the visual aspect of it. Is like, it's somebody reading a prose book, are they going to get jarred out of it if all of a sudden they get into like, oh, now there's sequential pages? Like, what's going on here, right? So I that took me a while. I had ideas, but that took me a while to kind of figure out. And then once I started doing it, I started. Sometimes you don't know until you know. Sometimes you don't know if it's going to work until you do it, right?
And then
And so I was like, okay, this is working. Yeah, this is good. I can do this. My mom finally, she just saw it recently, and I think you liked how it transitioned. It worked. So
Yeah, that was. It's really a very complex
mhm.
project.
Yeah.
Nothing like we've really seen before. I think the protagonist Leslie, he was able to um, devise these kind of fantasies, and so that she was outside looking in at the same time that she was inside looking out, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Right, Keith? She was,
Yeah, I mean, she was able to experience it while, being part of it, but experience some of these fantasies that she goes through in a fun and interesting way. Again, we don't want to give too much away, but it's just um, being able to figure.
yeah, and it informed her own view of the way she interacted with her father and other people, and it matured her. You know, you could see her maturing in the book.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Learning about herself, why she was the way she was, and how she interacted with other people. So it was a very interesting experience to go through as a reader and as the person who wrote it, because very often, you know, I'd write like a big piece of it, and I didn't see it again for a while because Keith was working on the illustrations, and then I'd go back to it and say, oh, did I say that? I don't remember that anymore. It was like, it was almost a revelation, and it was a very interesting experience. Very different than when we wrote our children's books, because that was there was so much shorter, obviously.
But also, you had more of a hand in regards to the prose aspect of it, whereas for this, I wanted to write more of the story. I wanted to be part of like right, because they think that, first of all, it's a really, as my mom said, it's really complicated. I don't know if she would have been able to navigate the story in the same way if you didn't have like, because there is such a huge element of it is sequential. I don't know how she would have been able to navigate that, because I did. I'm like, did you want to try to write the comic book scripts, and that I think was a little bit, you weren't sure you wanted to do that. And then I was like, well, I mean, I have no problem doing it, and because that's kind of the part of this that, you know, I was very confident. I knew like what the visual aspect of it would be required to do. But the initially, with the interesting thing about the workflow of this is that the sequential parts of it were initially prose. Like, we just wrote it because that was how, actually, that is how I navigate. That's how we navigated being able to write the whole thing. Is I was like, okay, let's just write back and forth. We'll just keep on writing this thing. You'll write the sequential parts as if they're prose, and then I'm going to go and once we get to a finished point, then I'm going to go back into that prose and turn it into scripts. And so it was, it was kind of a lot of figuring stuff out as we went.
Yeah, and it kind of mirrored what we did with the children's books. Like I said, there were certain parts of the children's books where I would write a description of something, and Keith would say, well, you don't have to, you know, I want you to write the description, because then I know how to illustrate it, and we don't have to say what's very obvious to look at, you know, the illustration. The illustration explains, you know, A to B, or, you know, what's going on, and you don't have to say it. And it's just, you know, redundant. And so it was kind of a similar situation, because then we were able to extract just what the very basic that you needed to say if the illustration is telling you what the story, what's happening in the story. So it was
really hard
very
me
difficult
because I'm trying to explain, like, we're doing the prose for like where sequentials are going to be. I'm like trying to explain to my mom's point. She's like, where like some of this isn't necessarily going to be said. It's just going to be seen. And so, but I wanted her to write it as if it was just a prose book. And so trying to explain that it's kind of really hard when I knew what it was going to look like for the most part, but I didn't also know until we finished the prose exactly what it was going to look like. And so, I mean, it was just really hard to kind of to work on that, especially when you're going through the prose part that's going to just be prose, and then transition to the prose that's going to be sequentials, and going, like, you didn't have to be as nitpicky about some of that stuff because it was like, well, I'm going to eventually draw it, so we don't have to worry about like some of the sentence structures being perfect, right? Because it's just going to be transferred into a script, right? So that was kind of like a hard thing to get through. It's like, okay, this we want it to read like prose because you want to read through the whole thing, but at the same time, some parts of it don't have to be perfect. So it was difficult. It was a hard thing to navigate. I don't know if I would do it the same way. If we do another one, I don't know if we would. Now that my mom has seen it and she kind of gets like what that transition from prose to sequentials is, you may even have a hand in going, well, let's just write that as a script next time, like as a comic book script, right? Because it was really for our benefit. It was for our benefit to make it prose first. But it's something if she can actually get, oh wait, it's okay not to like make it like prose. We can make it more like a comic script. Then, it may be easier. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if we're the second one.
Yeah, every project we do together, it's almost like we're starting from scratch again. Well, I mean, with the three children's books, each book we use less and less verbiage. Yeah, each one. The first one was like way too many words.
Yeah,
way too descriptive, and we kind of learned from that. And then the second was a lot more spare, and even the third one was even more spare.
Yeah.
Than the first two. And so each one is like my favorite because they're all very different and very different morals, and some of the poetry, I really like. But they probably got better as they went along because we were more experienced.
Well, yeah, I mean, I imagine so because one, like you said, you're more experienced. You know how to work together. You know how to sort of.
And it took a lot less time. After the first one took probably like a year and a half, and each succeeding one took less time. So, but this took a long time.
Yeah, this was just. This was very painful.
In a good way, but I don't know if I could do it again.
Yeah, this is a lot. This is a lot.
I mean, I'm glad we're at the point we are, but there was really. Yeah,
well, we'll have to see if the publisher wants to. If a publisher picks it up and they're like, "So, would you consider rewriting all this?" And you're like, "Oh." Number 75, or however many times we've rewritten this thing or added to it.
Yeah.
So, well,
I'm a baby.
But I'm willing to. Somebody comes up with some good ideas, I'm for sure willing to work and adopt it. But it's been a lot of work, for sure. It's been a lot of work.
Yeah, and in between all of his other projects and everything that's going on in our lives, we've managed to bring it forward, and I think do a great job on it. So we'll see.
And I mean, I think that in and of itself is quite the triumph. Like, from Keith's end of it, like making just a comic, no problem. If I'm sure if Keith was like, "Hey, I'm gonna make a comic book about X," Keith's gonna do it. From what I've come to understand about yourself, Amy, if you were just gonna write a book of poetry or a prose book, no doubt, cool, you could just do it. But I think with what you've explained and the details I've learned about the book, I think the sheer mechanics of it are what has must be challenging about it and what has been challenging. And I'm excited to see it when I can finally see it. Because it sounds like you're not just trying to take, oh, the first 80 pages are prose with every 10th page having an illustration on it, and then page 81 through 102 is comic book, and then the remaining is a mix. It sounds like you've done something really interesting with the actual, I can't say physical, it's digital. I'm assuming it's digital, but the actual way that the reader will interact with the book, whether it's on a tablet somewhere or if they're smart, a book, because I think books are awesome. And that should be very interesting.
It's become more graphic novel than prose for sure. Like the way for a while it actually took me a while to kind of wrap my head around like how to describe it. And then once I physically put the thing together, I'm like, no, this is a graphic novel with prose. Like it is, there's art on every single page. It's just in the way that it's integrated with the story. Some of it's more design, some of it's, like a spot illustration, and then there's sequential aspects, and then there's integration of the actual letters with art. Right, so it's cool. A combination. That's why I at this point I'm like I feel pretty comfortable saying it's a graphic novel with prose, right? And that's because of being able to actually see it visually now, right? Would you agree?
And I was going to say I think because of that, it's a different kind of production. Like Keith said, it's a graphic novel with prose. It probably would appeal to all different age groups and type of people. People my age that live through what I lived through. Young people that can identify with the character. I mean, and there's a lot of themes, like Keith mentioned. A little bit of racism and other themes throughout it. I think it would appeal to a lot of different people. I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, there's a central theme that it deals with, but there's basically, I mean, racism and like anti-Semitism and family and community and all that kind of stuff.
Misogyny.
Like it all kind of it melts together into a nice tapestry. But like there's like a central theme with it, and then that kind of
a little bit of a mystery.
Yeah, that dictates the story, though. But,
there's a lot of stuff going on. It's really very interesting.
Well, I am certain that when myself and the folks out there finally get a chance to get their hands on it and read it, and knock on wood that all goes well for yourselves with the agents and publishers. Like even from just the mechanics of taking it in and enjoying it, but also all of the content, the rich history of multiple generations of the family, getting to have that in there, I'm sure tons of people will be able to enjoy it. I did want to say we've got a minute and a half left, and we've been talking a whole bunch, but Keith, you've been drawing something that at first started to scare me, then it got like fuzzy looking and friendly, and now it's kind of creeping me out again. What are you drawing?
I don't know, just kind of cat creatures or something in a tree in a forest somewhere. I don't know. You tell me.
Is it currently upside down, or is the other way upside down?
I think this is the way it's supposed to be, because it's the tree is. I mean, it could technically. I guess it could.
One looks. Yeah.
Could do it this way too. I mean,
funny.
I don't know.
I like it that way.
You like it which way? This way?
No.
Yeah, I like the dark side up too. Yeah, I think that's
This way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, like he's hanging upside down,
Yeah.
Hmm.
or she,
Or it. Yeah.
or it.
It. I'm a big fan of it in this instance. Interesting. The face on that thing is something.
We're assuming it's the same similar face as the other creature that you only see the back of the
Could be.
head.
Yeah. Could be.
Hmm.
It looks like it would be.
Although it does look very fuzzy, and that's nice. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Then, Amy, one last question I have for you in our last 4 minutes or so. Um, given your history with Keith in creating as well as being his mother, um, I'm wondering what about your I guess current project. It sounds like it's done or nearly done, and now you're at the pitching point. But what about Summer on the Swing has been sort of your favorite part of the process or the experience?
Oh, sheesh. Um, you know, it's evolved over such a. We started what 4 years ago.
Yeah. Somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
So it's hard. It's hard to pick one thing out. I mean, I guess the memories of the people that I was close to,
Hmm.
and I've actually um, reconnected with a cousin that used to be
Oh.
up there, and so it was very nice to spend time with her, and just the collaborative process with Keith, I guess, is probably the best part. I mean, it's amazing that we live so far apart, and yet we can do it via email and phone call and visits with each other, and still manage to make something so beautiful.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, the whole process was very, very different and very interesting. So I've enjoyed all of it.
Right on. I like that. And Keith, I feel like as the other half of the creative team, what about you? What has been your favorite part about the process over the last 4 years?
I think getting to know like how my mom grew up a bit better, right? Getting to hear those stories and also stories about other family members. And as I said earlier, I just I mean, I'm turning 50 tomorrow, and so age isn't really, I guess, that big a deal for me, but something about the half a century mark is kind of an interesting thing. It's an interesting number, and just recognizing that, um, like people that have told these stories, that have lived these stories, are no longer around anymore, and who's going to
Hmm.
tell the stories, who's going to keep on doing it, right? So it's up to my generation to pass them on to younger generations, right? And that I think it's one of the reasons why I like teaching and doing workshops, is to be able to pass on the knowledge and experience I have. So this story is kind of an extension of that, is to be able to pass that along to people that family, other family, but also people, younger people that may have never heard about some of the World War II or Holocaust or pogroms and things like that, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that was probably the most important thing, is just to be able to have create a legacy, I guess.
And our little Zach, when I saw him a few weeks ago, he wanted to know about my father. Out of the blue, he said, "What was Papa's real name?" Papa was what everybody called him. I said, "Well,
Yeah.
his real name was Francis, but a lot of people called him Frank, but also he had a nickname of Babe." And so I was telling him about my father, and obviously, he never met him. Um, so yeah, to bring those stories to kids Zach's age, of my
Hmm.
generation and my parents' generation, is that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, there are so many reasons that I find people write books. Some of them just they felt creative, they wanted to do it, it was fun, and I think that's fantastic.
Mhm.
Sometimes I find people create a book and I think in the doing of that, it helps them process whatever they're thinking about, feeling, and going through. And I think the idea of going through and making this book to be able to share that legacy, to keep those stories alive, but also to help maybe teach people about, well, various things that sometimes people aren't the greatest about, you know, when it comes to things like bigotry, racism, all of that lovely stuff that humans can do to each other. But yeah, to share those stories so that we can learn from them, I think that's a beautiful thing. So to both of you, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Amy, thank you for being a guest.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Konrad.
Thank you. I highly appreciate it. And Keith, as always, it has been interesting, fun, and your art continues to amaze me.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that I was like, okay, I'm actually able to focus on this for an hour. So I was able to actually go into a little bit more detail than I normally do, just because, you know, I had the time to do it. I had the bandwidth to be able to just focus on this while I let my mom chat with you. So,
well, I dig it. Happy early birthday, by the way. I appreciate it's tomorrow, but happy birthday. And yeah, I guess to leave it on that, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Collector problems, cliffhangers.